Iowa got off to a start last night that was as good as they could have dreamed of. Unfortunately for them, the rule of basketball in playoff-style competition, or in this case, championship college-style competition, came to be true, which is eventually in every basketball championship matchup, there will be an adjustment that the other team, or that team one makes, that team two can't adjust to. And that ultimately is kind of what happened yesterday. Now, these two teams were fairly evenly matched in that Clark was able to overcome so much of what South Carolina has from a depth standpoint. But there's just a couple of things that they couldn't deal with. And that is part of it was the sheer numbers that, yes, Caitlin started on fire. 18 points into the first quarter, the most ever for a player in a quarter in an NCAA final. Nuts. She's hitting threes. She had a 30-footer. And you're just like, oh, God, she's about to do it again. And that's the thing that I think has made Caitlin Clark so remarkable, specifically in her senior year, is she has seemingly answered the bell at every major inflection point of the season. She has come through in the biggest moments. And even yesterday, with what we'll talk about in terms of her quote-unquote cooling off, she still finished the game with 30 points, 8 rebounds, and 5 assists, and that assist number would be higher if some of her teammates had made some pretty makeable layups. But the size, the athleticism, and the just sheer numbers of South Carolina ultimately meant that the indestructible force or the immovable object didn't move against what we thought was an indestructible force in Clark. And I think you brought this up when we were talking about the game pre-show, so I will give you the credit here. The fact that South Carolina, at this stage in the season, in the final game, when they had played all these games and the minutes had accumulated and they started their season in Paris and the whole deal, still had body after body to throw at Clark and play the kind of defense that West Virginia and LSU tried but couldn't because they didn't have the athletes to do it, both in the caliber and the quantity and quality, is exactly why Dawn Staley's team was the best team in the country. The ability to just say, all right, fine, you're torching her, try this one. Okay, you figured her out. All right, who's next? And Raven Johnson, who famously or infamously, depending on how you want to look at it, was the player that Caitlin Clark gave the what for, gave the whatever, shoot it, kid, I don't care, last year in the tournament, ultimately, ironically, inverted that equation. She went from Caitlin Clark doesn't care about being close to you to Raven Johnson is all up in Caitlin Clark's business. And the steal at the end of the half and just the generally great defense that Johnson was able to play and just devote that much energy to is the separator that holds Clark in enough check that South Carolina, along with some tremendous shooting on their own side of the ball, which is the other big difference between South Carolina this year and South Carolina last year, is why they have Dawn Staley's third national title.
Craig, we definitely were in for a treat yesterday. I think everything you talked about on the front of, what South Carolina was able to do against Caitlin Clark definitely was, instrumental in slowing her down those last 3 quarters. But I think Iowa, had they been able to just capitalize on a couple of, layups or, when layups, threes, like they had some really good looks at threes.
Late in the game, they get that huge steal where it looks like they're about to tie it up, and Sydney Falter, she just dribble out to safety. And instead she tries, and Falter made so many big plays. They're not in that space in the situation. Even within the game, they're not in that moment without Sydney Falter's contributions. But a huge, huge mistake to try to take on what ultimately wound up, she couldn't see behind her, was 3 South Carolina defenders, and they steal the ball right back, and that was kind of the moment where the game ended for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, and I think those are the moments, against a team like South Carolina that's so deep. They go 11 deep.
Yeah.
Not 10, 11.
Yeah.
So
the regular tightened rotation is 9.
Exactly. So I just feel as though in a game like that, you have to not necessarily be perfect, but almost play a perfect game. And you got off to the start that you wanted. You started to miss some shots. They definitely started to capitalize on some shots. They also capitalize on turnovers. But that is their bread and butter. That's what that's gotten them to this point. But like down the stretch of the games, when those moments matter, you got to be able to execute. And I think this South Carolina, they were able to just make one extra play after another, and ultimately end up getting the job done.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple. I think if you're Iowa today, you are kicking yourself because there's a couple of key mistakes that you made that you were in control of.
Mm-hmm.
I think objectively looking at this, like this is a tremendous success of a season for Iowa. Someone tweeted me yesterday. It's like Cardoso and Clark were playing pickup, but Cardoso got the first 8 picks. And I don't know whether it's 8 because as a college, like as pro prospects, sure. But as college players, like Kate Martin and Gabby Marshall, I'm so happy they got their shine over the course of this run, kind of being in the bask of the glow of Caitlin Clark, because they're tremendous college basketball players. Martin, I think, could be a pro. Like, if I'm a WNBA team and I just need like a glue player, like Kate Martin's someone I want on the end of my bench. Someone who I'm just like, you know what? Screw it. Let's see what Kate can do today. She's going to make the right play. She's going to make my practices better. Like, I would pay Kate Martin to be on my team. Knowing that she's never probably a WNBA starter, but like you need people who are going to be stars in their roles. And for this Iowa team, like Martin was tremendous. She also had a couple of whoopsies yesterday. I also thought there were a couple of plays, where maybe she does the right thing and she gets unlucky where she gets stripped or there seemed to be, she could not buy a foul call yesterday. I thought there was a couple of missed calls both ways. So I'm not by any means playing the like, oh, if it wasn't for the refs, Iowa would have won. There was a couple of calls both ways where you're just like, wait, what did you guys see there? There was a one travel call in South Carolina where it should have been a foul, but even if you don't call the foul, the pivot foot never moved.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just like, what?
On Cardoso, yep.
Yeah, on Cardoso. And then there was, Martin, it just seemed like and Clark both like got fouled on shots multiple times. And you're like, where's the call on that? And it happened the other way as well. So just a kind of a wacky, standardly wacky college officiating game. But like the Falter play, Stolke, I think obviously has that big missed layup where I think she converts so many of those that people underestimate how hard that is when you're running full speed and Clark just dots you with a dime and you have to catch and finish in one motion and try to slow yourself down enough that you don't just clang the ball off the backboard because you're running at literally full speed. The touch that requires, the athleticism that requires, and Stolke does it so well all year long, but like in the biggest spot, she bonks a layup. I think if you're Lisa Bluter, like I'm looking at my rotations going, why did I like Madison O'Grady, I think is her name, O'Grady, the backup big. Like she was really good for them all year. That was not her game yesterday. Like she took advantage of size and kind of strength all year. You can't do that to Cardoso, and Cardoso ate her lunch every time she was in. And by the end of the night, like Stolke's only played 27 of the 40 minutes, and she only had 2 fouls. So like, what are we doing there? So I think that there's things if you're Iowa as a competitor, and my apologies, it's Addison O'Grady, Addie, not Maddie. Addison O'Grady was the backup big who plays 13 minutes, and those were not quality 13 minutes. It wasn't her game. So as a coaching staff, I think you have to go like, what are we doing here? And in that way, I think if you're Iowa as a competitor, you're kicking yourself. As an objective observer, that's what happens against South Carolina. They're just better because that's what Dawn Staley has built. And what's crazy is, Ant, they are 109-3 in the last 2 years, or last 3 years. 109-3. Everybody but Cardoso is probably coming back unless they have players leaving the transfer portal. And undoubtedly, Dawn's probably got the best freshman class in the country coming because that's what she does. They are like, this might not even be the middle of the run. This might be the beginning. Like and they just won the title. This was supposed to be the down year. And this is what Dawn has built. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's actually crazy because, again, they lost all 5 of their starters from last year.
5 pros, 5 WNBA pros. Every single one of them was drafted.
Yep.
That doesn't happen in this sport.
And then you come into this tournament and you're relying on, Malaysia Wiley to come in and spark the offense. Also, Tessa Johnson came in and gave them a spark. And these are freshmen. So it's scary. I think it compares to, when Gino during the 2000s, I guess, when he just had multiple runs where his teams were winning 100 games, losing like 4 games over the span of 3-4 years. And it's just like, good gracious, like, will the bleeding ever stop? And I think you might be onto something. Like, this could possibly still be the beginning because, again, these impact players, they're freshmen. Sanaa Fagan, a freshman. So the sky's the limit for them right now.
It's crazy. I mean, actually, we watched the new Sue Bird doc last night after the game, and we were reminded, like, Sue is 2 years older than Diana Taurasi, and so Sue and company win a national title during Sue's sophomore year, and then DT comes into a team that had won a title. And they actually lost that next year and then won again Sue's senior year, and then DT wins another one, I believe, after Sue graduates. But that kind of run is what we're talking about when Gino goes Maya Moore into Brianna Stewart in the early or in the 2010s. Like, that's kind of what we're talking about here potentially with South Carolina. I do wonder, like, obviously Aaliyah Boston's a star, not just as a broadcaster, but it was so funny, the memes yesterday, because it's like, this is how happy you look when your team wins the Natty and Caitlin Clark becomes your teammate next week, because that's what Aaliyah Boston's reality is right now. But I do wonder who the next star is, and Wiley's certainly is candidate A right now. But it's going to be a lot of fun to watch this program continue to develop over the next couple of years. Like, if Rebecca Lobo was Asia Wilson, if you will, in the Connecticut-South Carolina analogy, who are the next couple of players that come through? It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll continue to break down the game next. And then we have a question for you coming up at 4:30. We'll go to the phones at 301-230-0980. Obviously, I'm wearing the shirt. Everyone watches women's sports, right? Like, we've seen the ratings. The biggest basketball game in ESPN's history is the Friday night game between UConn and Iowa. So now what? If you're one of the people that was watching, will you continue to watch? We'll ask that question, and how much really is the question. We'll ask that at 4:30, 301-230-0980. More talk about the game, and we'll touch on that Friday night game, UConn, as well, next on The Hoffman Show.
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's The Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.